Welcome to the Channel Champions podcast, powered by Evolve IP, hosted by Zach Anderson. Today, we'll explore the always evolving landscape of the IT, telephony, and communications channel. If you are a trusted advisor, strategist, IT consultant, or sales engineer, this one's for you. Today's guest is...
This is the Channel Champions podcast. This is episode 004. I've got my esteemed guests from Cloud Communications Group. Why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Keith Hatley, as you say, with Cloud Communications Group. I'm responsible for our sales and marketing efforts, and appreciate you having us on the podcast.
Absolutely.
And Chris Moffitt, I'm responsible for operations, engineering, maybe some finance, some HR, whatever else goes on. So
legal.
Yeah. Happy Friday afternoon.
Happy Friday. It is 5:00, right?
Yes,
It
is.
Definitely
it
5
is somewhere.
So
Yes.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Keith's drinking, what are you drinking over there?
Sincoro tequila.
Tequila. That's how you know you're from Texas, when you can just sip tequila like a boss.
Yes. You heard what
That's
he
right.
said there, Chris.
Yes.
Like a boss.
Yeah.
Boss.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so, gosh, where do we start? So CCG, when you guys have been around for a while, you both have been in the channel for almost 30 years, you both said. So I just I wanted to walk through, what the beginning was like, how you both got into this crazy thing that we call the channel and just the technology space in general. But Chris or Keith, tell us how you both met.
I'll tell you two maybe quick stories. Just, one as far as how I got into the industry, and then two, how we met. Because to your point, I think we've both been in this space for about 30 years. I spent more time on the direct side before I got into the channel. And then we certainly understood the value that we could provide through the partner side after having been on the direct side for a period of time. So having said that, I was a direct sales guy for a company called AllNet Communications. I went and met with a recruiter she said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I think I want to sell pharmaceuticals." She wanted to know why, and I really had no reason why. But I did tell her I knew that I didn't want to sell copiers. Okay. And little did I know that selling telecom essentially was the same thing, other than the fact that I didn't have to buy a new vehicle. And she said, "I've got just the job for you." So they sent me to interview with AllNet Communications, and I interviewed with a guy that was, wearing the Armani suit in the corner office in downtown Dallas with successful young people all over the place. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. I knew that right then that was where I wanted to work.
Did he have the fancy boots too? What are the boots that you guys wear?
No, boots are more Fort Worth than Dallas.
Okay. Okay. I know that's really far. So
it's actually
I'm just kidding.
Worlds apart for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Worlds
okay.
apart
46
for sure.
miles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And trust me when I tell you, I love my boots, but right out of school anyway, I thought I wanted to climb the corporate ladder. I wanted to be in corporate America. So for me, it was, put on my suit and tie and lace up my wingtips and, go pound the pavement.
Get after it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Chris, how did you enter the space?
Yeah, it was completely by accident. I was working for a hotel at the time, an entry level deal at the front desk, and I happened to be the guy who everybody believed knew the most about computers at the time, which, believe me, was sad. And so they were like, "Here, we're going to upgrade all these computers and these networks. Go figure it out." And I did, and got to know the company that we had hired to do it. Ended up going to work for them. And they were in the space of installing phone systems and voicemail systems at the time, which were separate from the phone system. That's how old I am. And I just kind of went from there. So it was complete accident.
And so what year did you guys meet?
1999.
99.
Yeah. And if you
Yeah.
ask me, it was 98. We debate that, but it was somewhere right in there.
January of 99. And I know that because I'd worked for a company called, after I had worked in AllNet, went to work for MFS.
Mm-hmm.
MFS sold to WorldCom, and the principals of MFS went and essentially started two different companies. Jim Crow went and started Level 3. Royce Holland went and started Allegiance Telecom. Allegiance was based here in Dallas, and my boss at the time was the first employee at Allegiance. And so I followed him to Allegiance. So spent some time here, and long story short, went and opened up Houston for Allegiance in January of 99. And somebody had told me that I needed to hire this guy named Chris Moffett. So Chris comes in to interview with me as a sales engineer manager. And I told him, I said, look, this is going to be the shortest interview you've ever had because the job is yours. And I told him, look, you could tell me you build rocket ships for a living, and I don't know the questions to ask to get inside of whether or not you build rocket ships. So I got a couple of conditions, and it was check your ego at the door. It's about building a company. Don't or do whatever it takes in order to allow our people to be successful. And then finally, don't ever make me find out what it is that you do, because if I need to know what you do, then I don't need you.
Right.
And I said, I see that you got a ring on your finger, so go home and talk to your wife and make sure that this is an environment you want to work in, because
Sure.
I'll fire you just as quickly as I hired you. And best hire I've ever made.
I guess so. He's sitting next to you,
He
the
is.
next office over.
Yep.
So
Yep.
there you go.
It's been fun.
Yeah,
for
it's worked out. It's
24
It's
years.
worked out well.
So you both came from the supplier side, and I was curious to know, how does one, in this channel space, I mean, how do you make that jump from the supplier side to the technology advisor side? I mean, what gave you the idea to want to go that route, so to speak?
I think part of it was, seeing a lot of the folks that had done it before and having a lot of the success that they had had. And in some cases, even, they were folks that weren't very successful on the direct side. At the same time, I will tell you, for us, it was hard because we had success and had, positions where you're considered a highly compensated employee. It's a challenge, to make that jump and say you're going to go build it from scratch. But Chris and I, again, I come more from the sales side, Chris from the operations side. We both went to business school, and now said, all right, we know a little bit about finance. So between the two of us, we understand, how to build a business, and certainly understand different aspects of the business. So after we got out of business school, we said, let's go do it. So having said that, both of us couldn't afford to be without a job at the same time. So I was running down the street, knocking on doors, because that's what I had done when I, first got into this business, in order to try and make ends meet. And I honestly only did it for about a year and a half. And then I got a call from the folks at Masergy, who were people that I had worked with at a couple of other companies in the past, that said, hey, it's an equity opportunity, mothball the business and come here and do it. And, while we really did, start to hit our stride at that point, honestly, I was just lonely. I went from, at one point, having almost 1,000 employees to now all of a sudden I'm sitting in an office, I'm not in high demand for sure.
Sure.
So it was an opportunity for me to get back to the leadership side of corporate America, which I certainly enjoyed. So I had a conversation with Chris and said, hey, this just makes sense. Let's mothball the business, and I'll go to this, to Masergy until there's a liquidity event, and then we'll, come back and do it together. So what I didn't know is after about 2 years, Chris then was going to call me and say, all right, I can't take this corporate stuff anymore. And he said, I want to go run the business. And I'll let him tell you a little bit more about that. But he did that for about 5.5 years or so, 6 years maybe.
Oh, wow.
Before I finished my stint at Masergy.
Mm-hmm.
And then now we've been back here together running the business for the better part of the last 4 years.
So Chris, what was it like without Keith there, kind of, helping you run the business for those 5 years?
Man, I got to tell you, it was pretty humbling. I got at the time pretty annoyed with where I worked, and so it was I just can't do this anymore. And it was pretty humbling because I'm like, I understand how this works. I think I've got a great message. Like, everybody is going to work with me. Everybody's going to buy stuff through us, and that's obviously not how it works. And so the first little bit of staring at the white walls, and it's like, man, like, why isn't my phone ringing? I don't get it. So again, it was an interesting experience. It was pretty humbling, and but again, glad we did it. I think I can speak for both of us. I think we're both glad we did it.
Yeah. So what year was it when you guys came back together and kind of formally started back up?
It was literally 4 years ago. Well, let me rephrase that. So when I went to Masergy, there was language in my offer letter that said, you've got to separate yourself from the business. So we did that, but it was, it stayed dormant for 2 years before Chris came back and then started running it. And then for both of us being back together, literally it'll be 4 years ago. I think technically July 1st is when I had left Masergy, or June 30th was my last day at Masergy.
Wow.
And I took a month off and then came back and started working in August.
Wow.
Actually, I don't even know if I took a month off. So I think maybe it was, anyway, took a little bit of time off in July. And, but as come this July, at some point, it will have been 4 years.
Wow. And little did you both know that 9 months later, we would have this, little thing that happened in 2020.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's really crazy is we had actually worked on a consulting project. I'll spare you the details there, but we spent a lot of time on a consulting project for the end of, I guess it was 2019. And before I left Masergy, it was so it was like, okay, I quit my corporate job. I buy a second home in Montana. And then we spent a lot of time on this consulting project that ultimately didn't bear fruit. And starting in January of 2020, we've got an empty funnel. And then in March of 2020, actually, take a step back. One of the things that I had done is called some peers in the space that said, all right, what are you doing to build a business? And we had gotten some advice around doing events, and we organized an event to do with contact centers.
Okay.
And it was to be at SMU, and we had Genesis and Five9 and NICE and TalkDesk.
Sure.
They were all going to be on a panel, and that was going to be our coming out party, if you will.
Wow.
And to your point, the world shuts down, about a week before we were supposed to do the event.
Oh, geez.
So yeah, it was scary.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it gave us the, kick in the pants that we needed to get out there and cold call again.
Right.
In order to allow us to build the business. And, we've been fortunate and we've had a good run. And as a matter of fact, I would also say that COVID, honestly, in a lot of ways helped us because
absolutely,
aside from the fact that people then were procuring technology, it also allowed us to do business like this.
Right.
Right. We weren't having to spend a ton of money going out to, see our customers, because that's the other thing is a lot of our customers aren't based here locally.
Right.
So, and it became a standard way to do business, here over a video connection versus having to get on a plane,
right,
and spend money that, quite frankly, we might not have had at that time.
Sure.
So anyway, so yeah, it's been a really good run. I think both of us feel blessed that we've been doing it and having an opportunity to do it here together.
Yeah. So 2019, you guys are officially restarting CCG.
Sure.
At that time, did you have, I don't want to say a commitment to, but did you have relationships with some of the TSDs at that time? Or did you, what was the process there for sort of your go to market at that time?
Well, so when I had started the business, at least to my knowledge, there was really only one game in town
Mm-hmm.
when I first started, and so I think Chris really just kind of maintained that relationship,
Who was that with?
and it was with Intelisys.
Okay, got it. Nice.
So and then we diversified once I came back. Just really because it's like, all right, if we're gonna use tools or leverage resources, then let's make sure that they get a return on that investment.
Mm-hmm.
So and anyway, we've got relationships with multiple different masters, and all of them treat us very well.
That's great. And so I'm always curious to know, just because I'm more on the supplier side, but as a technology advisor, I mean, how critical are those relationships with the TSDs? I guess back then, I guess you could go back to 2019, but then also today. I mean, how critical was that, or with regards to your success and what you were doing at the time?
I would say they're critical for sure. I think different people use them for different things.
Interesting.
Okay. Just case in point, when we first started the business, I thought, again, let me make sure that I leverage a master for contracts that I didn't have.
Okay.
And I felt like, hey, I've got relationships with a lot of folks in this space that would allow me to go ahead and get direct contracts, and it did.
Mm-hmm.
But it's difficult to keep up with those contracts. And then when one company sells to another and sells to another and sells to another, it potentially leaves you exposed.
Yeah.
So so that said, for us, the master relationships are critical,
Mm-hmm.
because they have provided us with a tremendous amount of protection.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously gives us access to tools and
Sure.
and a portfolio that we wouldn't otherwise be able to have.
Sure.
And certainly expertise, and then obviously compensation, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that different people use different masters or use masters differently.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately for me, I've got a resource like Chris and other folks here in the office that are pretty technical, that sometimes, may minimize our dependence on some of those technical resources that a master provides a lot of other partners.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, I think the relationships with masters are critical for a number of different reasons.
Yeah. So since you do have Chris as your sort of technical resource at CCG, do you feel like that gives you a leg up over, I don't know if I want to use the word your competition in the space, but when you're having conversations with potential clients and you do have that in-house resource, I mean, how, do you think that gives you a leg up as well? Or do you think that other technology advisor companies can sort of leverage other resources like a TSD or like a supplier for that matter when they don't have that in-house technology resource?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I'd answer that probably a couple of different ways. One, I don't think that other people that do exactly what we do are the competition.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we have really a competitor, it would be a direct sales organization.
Okay.
Right. And further, what I think is I think the model sells itself.
Sure.
Right. Again, I may compete with, ABC company.
Mm-hmm.
But ABC company only sells ABC company. And even if ABC company isn't the right fit, they get paid to try and convince somebody that they are. So I think our clients really do appreciate the model of agnostic consulting.
Sure.
And that's really what we try and position ourselves as, and try and provide a product that allows us to act as a consultant. But honestly, we don't come across many folks, many other, let's say trusted advisors
Mm-hmm.
in the opportunities that we're involved with.
Interesting.
So I know that will continue to change, or at least I believe that will continue to change, just because I believe that this space is becoming more attractive.
Yeah.
And continues to provide value that allows us to go up market. I think there's certainly been an evolution in the channel. And I think for a long period of time, you had, for lack of a better way to put it, just circuit slingers that were out there selling a price.
Right.
And now what you have is you've got sophisticated sales organizations that really understand the technology and do treat it like a consulting engagement, whereby they do provide consulting on the evaluation side and provide support in implementation, and then an ongoing relationship through lifecycle management, which justifies a customer wanting to do business then with said trusted advisor.
Yeah, it's truly a partner for the client, for a long time. And in many cases still, other companies that in our industry, they treated everything transactionally. They would sell something, they may help you get it implemented, but then they've got to move on, and they're going chasing the next win. And we absolutely stay involved. And so to that point, it's why, again, I don't think, I agree with Keith. We don't see a lot of those, maybe on paper competitors. We don't look at them that way.
That's interesting.
Well, I think too.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to add to that. I think part of that too is the space that we're selling into. We've gone from selling, anybody that was buying anything to selling more into what we consider the enterprise space. Maybe it's the small end of the enterprise space.
Okay.
So that we define as 500 million to 5 billion. And while we certainly have opportunities that fit on the outside of both ends of that spectrum, our focus is in that larger opportunity, in part because it's a bigger mess, and the bigger the mess, the more opportunity that we have to bring value.
Do you think it's easier or harder, working in that enterprise, the type of range that you said, versus sort of the small to medium sized business market?
I don't know that there's an easy answer, but I can answer it in a couple of ways. I think it is definitely harder for somebody like me, because I'm not a technology guy. And I don't sell technology. I want to look to understand the business and then leverage technology to solve business outcomes. But I think there are plenty of folks like me that sometimes have a challenge, because you have to make sure that you're solving that technology side.
Right.
I do think, it takes a lot of effort to sell any kind of deal.
Sure.
So, you'd like to think that, all right, well, then let me go spend that same amount of time to sell a deal on a bigger deal than a smaller deal. And sometimes on the bigger deal, sometimes they have more sophisticated resources, where you don't necessarily have to go through every I and every T to make sure that everybody understands everything, because they have people that have some of that understanding.
Yep.
By the same token, it's still a challenge to navigate the sales process. And you've got to make sure that you've got the chops that allow you to do so. And whether that's your internal chops or whether that's leveraging the master. But I'll also say that, the buying process, certainly when you're selling into those larger opportunities, there's a lot more people involved.
Oh yeah.
So you also have to make sure that you are touching all of the decision influencers
Right.
to, help deliver that outcome.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's almost and what's interesting about that is just, for us, we talk about that a lot too, is that, I think the smaller organizations, they need more of a larger, they're looking for a more of a resource, whereas the larger companies already have that. And so when you're positioning your company, when you're talking about CCG, I mean, how do you position yourself just across the board? Like when you're, I would say, when you're courting a company, a prospective client, how do you position yourselves? And you know, is it ever hard to kind of get across? Because obviously in the channel, we know what a technology advisor company is, right? But end users, I mean, before I came to Evolve, like I didn't know what it meant. So like, why is that even beneficial? But for you guys, do you ever find that that's a challenge that you're having to explain what it is exactly that you're doing and how you're bringing value to them? That was a long question. I'm sorry.
No, and the short answer is yes. It is hard um, to deliver that message in an appropriate period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if we've got a lot of time and we can show them, artifacts and provide them with different anecdotes and examples of what it is that we've done, then yeah, absolutely, it makes sense. But you've also got all right, kind of what's the catch? Okay, wait a minute. You're going to provide me with this, evaluation and design and engineering work on the front end, and it's not going to cost me anything. And just quite frankly, we do different things. So certainly when we first started going into the business, again, it was sell anything that you can.
Right.
Then it's all right. Well, we're providing a lot of value,
Yeah.
and you don't go to the doctor without paying for it.
Right.
So we've done different things in that regard, but there's no question it's always a challenge, just because sales is always hard.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're getting better and better at it in terms of communicating the different areas that we do provide value.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting okay at it, but I'm not going to give you our secret sauce.
That's fair. I wouldn't ask for it, but I am interested. I think it is interesting. I keep bringing up channel partners, just chatting with you guys, but I think what's interesting now is, you say that you're really not competing against these other technology advisor companies, which I think is great. I think that's great just as a channel in general. The more willing that we are to collaborate and communicate, not necessarily share secret sauce, but just, being willing to kind of align and, share in these different opportunities. But it's just interesting to hear you say that, we're not competing against each other. And I think that's really cool.
Well, and let me clarify too on the secret sauce piece. I am a big proponent of, a rising tide raises all ships. And when I first got into the space or got back into the space, I reached out to, all of the folks that in this industry. And there were those that were willing to share openly.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some that weren't.
Yeah.
So I will tell you, I am, and Chris is certainly willing to do the same thing, but we're willing to share openly what it is that we do, really.
Mm-hmm.
So, and trust me when I tell you, there is no rocket science behind it. At the end of the day, it's, communicate what it is that you do, then do what you say and follow up and stay engaged. Again, it's really simple stuff.
Mm-hmm.
where it's almost unbelievable.
Right.
So, but having said that, it's you also have to have a trained ear as it relates to, okay, here's where we can provide value.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll also tell you this, there's no question I bring the least amount of value to any of our engagements. And Chris thinks that I joke when I say that because I believe that. And also I certainly understand my place, and I don't, the company does nothing without sales, right? It's, you have to make sure that you get in the door.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of all the things that happens from there as it relates to the consulting, on any number of different areas, really comes from Chris and other folks on the team.
Mm.
So, and that also does allow us to do well, which then ultimately in turn is great for the customer, because
Right.
we do a lot with not as many customers,
Right.
which allows us to be, boutique, and allows us to understand more about their business, which then in turn allows us to provide more value. So,
Well, and to add in again, keep this sell himself short. It's the team that that's put together here. It truly kind of exemplifies that 1 and 1 is more than 2. 1+1 is more than 2. But again, it comes down to listening. And there's an insurance company that I'll give them credit for their slogan. It's we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two.
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of the way this works. Keith has run large sales organizations, so he understands what somebody that's trying to drive revenue for a business is dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
We have another gentleman here that's been CIO of Fortune 300 companies, so he understands what it's like to have to deal with those kind of things. And so when we come in, we can listen, and it's not, hey, how many servers do you have, or how many widgets do you have over here? It's, so what problems are you guys trying to solve? What are you looking at to grow revenue this year?
Right.
And how is your customer satisfaction looking? And you can truly become that business partner. And so that's again, it's not necessarily a secret sauce, but I think it's something that does set us apart.
Right. So like, depending on, I think that's interesting what you said. So it's hard to say like, okay, you have this problem, that means that you need this solution. So can you, I guess from a technical standpoint, Chris, could you tell me about what your process is when you are hearing these, these pain points, I guess, when you're talking to a prospective client and they're saying these certain things, because in the back of your mind, you got to be thinking about what sort of supplier portfolio that you've got, to access, right? But how do you marry those two things together? Like when you're hearing these pain points, you're like, okay, that means that they need this sort of solution.
Yeah, good question. There's a couple of different answers. There are, whether anyone wants to admit it, there are commodity products in our industry, and so depending on the pain point, if it's a commodity product, that's a fairly simple fix. Some of the more complex ones, whether it's in security or whether it's in customer experience, again, we try, I think, in our team together to figure out what they're really after. Keith mentioned we went to business school, and one of my favorite things from B school that I still talk about, and I'll give him credit, is a marketing professor at SMU named Bill Dillon. He had a saying that was, nobody in the world has ever bought a 1/4-inch drill bit. They're buying a 1/4-inch hole. And, so it's one of those things you try and figure out, all right, what are they actually trying to solve? Because, the things, an example of my network goes down every day. Okay, that's a problem, but there's multiple fixes to that. So it's like, okay, so let's get into, do we know why it goes down? And not just why, but what is it going to need to do in 24 months? You mentioned COVID. I don't know that anybody in 2018 or 2019 was planning for, 90+% of their staff to be working remotely and accessing. So, just things like that. It's truly listening and trying to understand what the business really needs.
So when you
I would add just one thing though, real quick.
Go
I
ahead.
think I do think one other important thing to note though is, you talked about marrying together the products, right? And thinking through that. And we don't necessarily think about it like that.
Huh.
I think the business organically happens.
Hmm.
And what we do is what we try and do is, call it servant leadership. Let's do the right thing, right?
Yeah.
If you can help somebody, help them.
Yeah.
And if you do, then inevitably what happens is you find all kinds of business opportunities. But if you go in there just looking for how do you marry it up to a product,
Hmm.
you miss the bigger picture. And I know that sounds so nuanced, but it's a huge, huge difference.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Or makes a huge difference. Anyway, I don't mean to suggest that other people don't do the same thing.
Yeah.
But it's a huge difference in terms of the impact that it has on the other side of the desk.
Yeah.
And fortunately, we're now at and again, don't get me wrong, right? Go back to when we first started the business. It was, I'm going to ask you, 3, 4, 5, 10 qualifying questions. And if
Yep.
there's not a buying opportunity right now,
Yeah.
I'm out the door.
Yep.
And now it's all about build a relationship and oh, by the way, build an authentic relationship.
Sure.
Because the good news is what we do allows us to scale because there's so many different solutions that we can provide.
Right.
But it's just kind of shifting the paradigm, if you will, in terms of how you approach the end user.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it has a profound difference.
And one thing I want to add to that I thought was pretty neat to see when it happened, and it's happened repeatedly after. But we've had one client who has an issue that's not really in our realm, but we know them enough that we hear about it, and we're like, you know what? We have this other client that I bet they've had something similar. Let's talk to them. And we've actually connected clients of ours that, again, are kind of outside the scope of our expertise, but they were able to help each other in that little ecosystem. And again, it's that, thinking beyond the transaction, and it's a true relationship. So
thinking beyond the sale.
Yeah.
Yeah. And focusing on, longevity of the relationship, right? Because I mean, how many
Absolutely.
other businesses would do that, would go out of their way to say, hey, I'm not quite sure about that, but maybe this idea could work. Maybe this, we have another client, like you just said, that has had that problem and they've actually fixed it. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have told clients to do things that are, short term, not in our best interest. It's, hey, look, there's this other solution over here. It's a lot less. It may not have, a lot less expensive. It may not have all the bells and whistles, but you don't really need all these bells and whistles. So we think this is the right thing for you. And we've done that. We do that, regularly when appropriate.
One thing I was going to ask earlier was, when you are in sort of that discovery process, and I mean, let's say, for example, hypothetically, that they have these problems and that multiple providers could fix that problem. So how, what's the process like of bringing in multiple suppliers on, one sort of opportunity? And does that happen often, or has it ever happened to you guys? Or
Sure, it's happened. Having said that, it doesn't happen a lot. We'll make a recommendation based on the business requirements. And, while we've got a portfolio of 300 providers or what have you, there are only so many that we believe, for one reason or another, fit into the space and the solution that we're trying to deliver. And depending upon, what stack that's in, there are just nuanced differences that say, here's why you need to go with XYZ as opposed to ABC. But when you're talking to both of those companies, it's going to be hard for you to understand those differences, right? Because maybe you're not asking the right questions, but assuming we understand what it is that you're trying to solve, it's typically, not more than a handful of players that are good fits. Having said that, culture is a big thing for us. And we communicate that with our customers is here are people that, may be really good at, delivering XYZ solution, but inevitably something is going to go wrong.
Right.
And they might not be as good as it relates to servicing those challenges. So having said that, it's always their decision, but we typically have good enough relationships with our customers where they get to the point where it's tell us what we should do. And we're not bringing in multiple different providers.
Right.
Now we may tell them kind of the selection process. Sorry, Chris. We may tell them kind of our selection process. So if for some reason or another, they, kind of disagree or they feel like we more heavily weighted one thing versus another, they're certainly, open or willing to give us different direction. But we're typically going in pretty hot and heavy with a recommendation. I'm sorry, Chris, what were you going to say?
No, and you're spot on. And the only thing I would add for any suppliers and providers that see this is where the TSDs that we talked about earlier and some of those firms, when they can come in, because to Keith's point, it's usually not this is a toss up. Somebody pick the logo colors they like. There's usually a really good reason why somebody is going to be good at this. It's
sure.
I have this problem I'm trying to solve. I use this CRM system. I use this ITSM. I mean, this geography, whatever it may be. There's somebody that kind of checks that box because that's why, that supplier started. That is where I think suppliers, in some cases, miss the boat a little bit with the TSDs, is getting them to understand those kind of details. Because when we call, somebody and say, hey, I need this, here's XYZ criteria, they should be able to go, yep, that's so and so and so and so. So that's the thing for the suppliers that may hear this.
So that's an interesting point, because you said earlier there are some products out there which a lot of suppliers sell that are commoditized. So what's your advice to suppliers that do sell those commoditized products? How do those suppliers make, like, just like you said, if you want to make it easy for the TSDs, tell them exactly where you fit, but because what's your thought there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if it's truly a commodity product, and we all know those out there, be easy to work with.
Yeah.
We were talking, we try to, make life easy for our clients. That's part of it. If you're, installing internet circuits that probably 55 different companies can do in your geography, wherever you are, be the easiest to work with. Because that is a big, big, big win.
Yeah.
The less effort that organizations have to spend, the better. So that would be my advice. Be easy to work with and do what you do well.
Love that. Keith, were you going to say something? I thought I heard you.
No, I was actually just looking at your whiskey glass. Are those mountains on the bottom of them?
It is a mountain on the bottom.
Yeah. I have similar glasses, or maybe even those exact glasses.
Yeah, I like it a lot. It actually, I don't know if it's to measure how much whiskey is in there, but I don't know. I've measured it out like with a shot glass, which is an ounce, and it comes just below the peak of that mountain. So it's kind of like a way to keep myself honest.
Yeah, I've got a set that has different mountain ranges.
Oh, that's cool. That's not as cool as mine. This is just kind of.
No, it is. It's cooler, actually.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Well, I find you guys will be much happier when you pay attention to the whiskey and not the glass. But I'm just kidding.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Gosh. So one thing I wanted to ask about earlier was somebody brought up CX, which I think is so interesting now, because it means, in my opinion, I think it means different things to different people. I say people broadly because you've got the technology advisors, you've got customer / end users, you've got the TSDs, right? So what does it mean to you guys? What does CX mean to you? And then I want to follow that up with, what does that mean to your customer?
Well, I would say to us, that's a great question. I would say I want our clients to look at us as a addition to their team that they don't want to live without. And whether that is the IT organization and more of a kind of a tactical infrastructure, or again, in a lot of cases, our engagements are not with IT. It's with customer service. It's with the sales organization. It's with, other business units. So same thing. That's what I would say it means to us. Keith, I don't know what your thought is.
I mean, I never, well, I would say it's just getting people what they want, when they want, how they want. Right. So again, just a different way to say the same thing, I think, is, being an asset and a resource for our customers that they can't live without. And I think it's similar to, for customers, you want to work with people that are easy to do business with. You want to work with people that really bring value to you. I was IMing with one of my customers just a minute ago with, all right, what do you have going on this weekend? But we've gotten to that point because we first have added value.
Right.
Right. I can remember the old days in sales, and they teach you to, build a rapport.
Yeah.
And what was interesting is I was like, people can smell a fake.
Oh yeah.
Right. There's not rapport really. I mean, don't get me wrong. Right. I mean, let's try and build a little bit of rapport, but let's quickly get down to business.
Right.
Because again, everything that you're doing, Mr. Customer, has an opportunity cost associated with it. And you talking to me is keeping you from doing something else.
Yep.
So allow me to quickly determine or provide you with some information to allow you to quickly determine whether or not we can bring value.
Sure.
And then once you bring value, then you can build the rapport, and it's anyway, it's a great relationship then.
Yeah. People smell, or people can see through bullshit. Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
But what's also interesting today is with all, as far as consumers go, like how people buy things, you've got Amazon, right? So if it's me and I want to go buy a shirt, right? I'm going to go on Amazon and I'm going to say, I want a blue or pink polo, right? And then I'm going to look at all the reviews that I can on this shirt, and then I'm going to make that decision for myself. So knowing what we know now about how consumers buy things today, has that affected how technology or IT leaders purchase solutions? Like, has that sort of, are they buying the same way as like a typical consumer?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, sorry, Chris. I mean, I'll tell you, my first reaction to your question is, number one, we're not selling to the consumer.
Right.
But I understand your question. Two, in the space that we're selling into, these folks have to justify the decision that they're making.
Sure.
Right. So they're having to go to an executive committee or steering committee or board of directors that says, here's what it is that they're doing. So, I mean, certainly there's some subjectivity in it. But what we try and do is make it very objective, right? Understanding what those requirements are. Again, there may be some subjective component to it, but allowing those decision makers to support the decisions or the recommendations that they're making with objective data and objective information.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would say in the light of how people purchase, because to your point, you can go online to buy that shirt at, I'm going to guess, thousands of different places if you looked for them.
Sure.
I think it comes back to the service of setting people apart, and I think at least in my personal experience, I've started to see where things are purchased, and some of that online shopping is now paying attention to, all right, this one can actually get it here, Amazon, it shows up on Prime Day or whatever.
Right.
So I think with that, I won't say that we've seen technology leadership pay more attention to quality. I won't necessarily phrase it that way, but I think it's almost a discussion about their purchases are leading with quality, because I think they understand that if I don't deliver, or this solution doesn't deliver, it is absolutely detrimental in the business. It's not enough to just simply have something that looks and sounds good, out there on the web. We have to actually deliver. And so kind of, I think to what Keith was saying, you've got a lot more focus on, justifying, here's why we're doing what we're doing. Here's the positive to the business of what we're doing.
Right.
And truly measuring that back to the customer experience.
Right. What's interesting to me is you can go on Amazon and see this thing has 10,000 reviews, right? So one would say that subjectively, those 10,000 people thought that this thing was great. But I wonder at what point with all those reviews, does it not become subjective or anecdotal? Does that make sense? And I'm wondering how that will correlate with how people would buy technology. Like, instead of hearing about how great it is from the actual supplier or from the technology advisor, I wonder what that's going to turn into down the road. Like if outside reviewership is going to play a bigger role, or is it more like today? I think a lot of it comes down to the relationship that, for example, you guys would have with different suppliers and stuff like that. But I just think it's an interesting time. And I'm curious to see what it's like, say, 5 years from now, what the consumer type is and how they actually buy things, specifically technology in the channel.
Yeah, reviews are an interesting one. And it actually, that analogy of like an Amazon review or a Yelp type review, I would say is an argument in favor of working with someone like us. I will take, and I think most people would be the same, we would take a review of a product or service from a friend has a ton of weight. Personal example, today, I had to have a new key fob made for my daughter's car. And, I had the choice of going to the dealership, which wanted to charge me $612. And so I sent a text message to some of my friends, hey, anybody done this? And somebody came back, oh yeah, these guys are great. They did it. It was half the price.
Nice.
So I think that's kind of the value with us is, we build those relationships with clients and we give them that review and that experience, but from a trusted source.
Yeah.
So, which I think is hard to replicate, in the quantity that, again, 10,000 reviews on an Amazon product or whatever. I mean, it would take you, I don't know how long it would take you to read that, but longer than I think anybody is going to take.
Yeah. Well, and I think for your customers specifically, from a CCG standpoint, I mean, you have the advantage of being in the space for 20 years or with almost 30, right? So that's not subjective or anecdotal at that point. But if you could, going back to when you first started CCG, I mean, what sort of advice would you give to your younger selves starting this new company when you don't have that, I would venture to say objective experience, right? Or that sort of objective knowledge of what you deem to believe is best for the company, for the customer. Like what do you What advice do you give to yourself back then when you don't have that resource?
I would say the one thing that, again, I think, I don't know that it would be considered advice, but I would say it's maybe a reinforcement, because I think we're pretty good at it. We're not perfect at it, but the way I think you build that credibility is you do what you say, where you do what you say you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
We've had instances where, client, I'll follow up with you by the end of the day with the answer. And we don't have the answer by the end of the day, but there's a phone call made that says, "Hey, I told you I would follow up. I don't have the answer, but I wanted to touch base and let you know that we're still working on it."
Yeah.
So you keep your word. So I think, maybe not necessarily advice, but a reinforcement, because we try and do that. Again, we're not perfect, but that's what we strive for.
Sure.
I would say we're pretty close. No, I was going to say as it relates to doing what we say we're going to do within a period of time anyway. I mean, that I would say that's just part of our culture, but your question, was, how do you objectify it? I think it's really all, I mean, certainly there are some subjective pieces to it, but it's just really making sure that you've documented the requirements and then being able to substantiate how somebody does or does not meet those requirements.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, to Chris's point before, there are some commoditized products out there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then it boils down to, all right, well, do you like the account management team better?
Sure.
Or do you like the pricing better?
Yeah.
Or do we have higher level relationships anyway, that will allow us to get something done in the event that, normal channels don't allow for appropriate resolution?
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that by and large, those are the same things that we've always done. Be able to support what it is that you say. It's like everybody's got a boss,
Mm-hmm.
right? So just make sure that you're making that person that you're working with look good in front of their boss. And typically, if you can justify a decision, whether or not they agree with the decision, but at least if you can walk them through, here's the data that we've reviewed, right? Here was the problem that we looked to solve. Here's the process that we went through to solve the problem, the data that we reviewed, and here then was the outcome. That typically puts people in a good light.
Yeah. Well said. All right. Well, we've gone about an hour and it has flown by. I have one more thing for you guys. What's it been like working with Evolve IP? And more pointedly, how did you know that Evolve IP was, pick any sort of opportunity, but how did you know that Evolve IP was the right supplier out of all the 300 suppliers in your portfolio?
I'll take a crack at that. I think as it relates to being a supplier was honestly was you guys wanting to come by our office. I mean, we're just like the customer.
Yeah.
Right. You're killed with, emails that are just loading up the inbox, and it's difficult at times to sort through, what's just noise. So one, it was spending some time with somebody in our office to understand a little bit more about what it is that you do. And then on the other side, I think it kind of goes to some of the things that we talked about before as it relates to culture and being entrepreneurial and being easy to work with is, certainly in some cases anyway, you guys are selling some sophisticated products, especially, from a DAS standpoint. And it isn't cookie cutter.
Right.
Right. It isn't one size fits all. And, it's looking at an opportunity in a way that says, okay, yes, we can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we can scale with the customer, right? As opposed to essentially just doing a one-off that then breaks when somebody calls, service, right? Or they can't, track it once it gets to somebody outside of the sales organization. But it's having been willing to look at opportunities in a way that says, yes, this makes sense. Yes, we can provide appropriate service, and certainly, we can make money. those are companies that we like doing business with, is because not everything is always right down the middle of the fairway.
Right.
Right. And typically with the opportunities that we are selling to, it's not just right down the middle of the fairway. Whether it's special contract terms or something, there's something that's a little bit unique. And you guys have, certainly supported the endeavor there. And don't get me wrong, because again, we come from the service provider side. We're not wasting anybody's time, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least we think it makes sense in the event that we're bringing it to you.
Right.
But I think culturally, your willingness to look at it like that, and then secondarily, our relationships at the level that allows, them to look at it from an outside the box standpoint has been, certainly beneficial to the relationship.
That's great.
Chris, anything you'd add there?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Just, the willingness to get in and, all right, let's figure out how we can, get that client that 1/4 inch hole versus selling them a 1/4 inch drill bit.
Well said. Well, gents, it's been great. I guess for those that want to check you guys out, are you on LinkedIn? How can people find you?
Yeah, both of us are certainly on LinkedIn. We've actually recently hired a marketing firm, so hopefully they'll be doing a good job and will make it a little bit easier for people to find us and understand some of the different things that we do. But yeah, we're certainly available on LinkedIn and on the web at cloudcom.net. Excellent.
All right. Any events coming up that you guys are going to be at?
Huge one, actually.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
It's our internal event. We're hosting a technology leadership summit down at Lajitas, which is it's a unique place down on the Texas-Mexico border. And it's really just an opportunity to build relationships with a handful of IT leaders that we're bringing down there. Certainly we've got some content that we're covering with them, but it's also a laid back agenda that allows us appropriate time to build relationships and, over a 2.5 day period. So it's going to be fun. We'll keep you posted.
That's great. Well, I can't wait to see pictures. Yep. Thank you both so much. I appreciate you coming on, and I have to do this again. This was fun. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Same.
Cool.
Appreciate the time.
Absolutely.
That's a wrap on this episode of the Channel Champions podcast. You can find this and all our episodes on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite streaming platforms. If you have any suggestions for future episodes, guests, or topics, please reach out to us. We appreciate you coming along with us on this journey and hope you'll be back for the next episode. Until then, stay tuned, stay connected, and stay inspired.